And if we can pull up the visual of our other guest, Stephen Fisher, we're very pleased to have here Cassie Flynn, the Global Director for Climate Change at the UN Development Program. I believe we will be joined online by Stephen Fisher, who is Professor of Political Sociology at the University of Oxford. And they're going to brief on the launch of the People's Climate Vote. Can we get Mr. Fisher's visual up, please? Oh, okay, great. We can see you both. All right. First, I think I'll turn the floor over to Cassie Flynn, and then we'll hear from Mr. Fisher. Please.
Thank you, Farhan, and good to see you all. The People's Climate Vote launches today. This is the world's largest standalone survey on the climate crisis. We have surveyed over 77 countries, representing 87% of the world's population. The survey encompasses about 15 questions that talk about whether how people are experiencing the climate crisis, and then what they want world leaders to do about it. And out of this survey, the message is clear. There's a huge majority, 80%, of people want countries to strengthen their commitment on the climate crisis. And what's increasingly striking about this is that in a moment where we are seeing and experiencing increased polarization, increased divisions over issues like trade and security, that over 86% of people say they want countries to put aside their differences and collaborate on the climate crisis. And these numbers, as staggering as they are, do come at a really important time. We have, of course, just outside, we have a heat wave going on in New York City. We have increased wildfires, droughts, sea level rise. We all know that this climate crisis is on the doorstep. And as the Secretary General has said, the issue of being able to stay below 1.5, it is possible. It's just about possible, but we have to take action here and now. And it's very clear that people want to see climate action urgently. And of course, we are also, as we look at the next time frame over the next real 18 months, 2025 will mark the 10-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement. It will also be a very key milestone where world leaders are meant to show up to the global stage at COP30 with their nationally determined contributions, these pledges that every country has to make every 5 years. The next round comes next year. And so the decisions that are being made now among policymakers, government by government, civil society groups, and business leaders, how all these voices fit into this conversation is more important than ever. And as you know, UNDP, in collaboration with the entire UN system, under the leadership of the Secretary General and UNDP Administrator, has launched the Climate Promise to support countries to be able to support them on developing these NDCs in a way that is ambitious. And we see the People's Climate Vote as a key way to bring the voice of the people to this very important conversation that is happening now that has such high stakes over generations to come. So to dive a little bit into some of the key points of the survey, there's a few striking things that the survey tells us. And the first is that it's very clear that people all over the world in every single country are living the climate crisis. Globally, over half of people said they think about the climate crisis either daily or weekly, and 2/3 say that they incorporate decisions around their lives, where they live, where they work, what they buy, by taking into account the climate crisis. We saw these numbers be particularly high in SIDS and LDCs. In SIDS, it was 80% of people. In LDCs, it was 74% of people. And then the next piece of this is that people are unafraid of bold climate policies. 72% of people globally said that they want to see the transition away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And this includes populations in the 10 biggest producers of coal, oil, and gas. 8 in 10 people globally said they want more protection from extreme weather, and 4 in 5 said countries need to do a lot more to be protecting and restoring nature. These solutions to the climate crisis are very critical to this. And so as we move forward, our goal again is to really bring the voices of the people to this debate, to be able to show world leaders that people are unified, even when we may have differences on many things around the world. And we are on the cusp of some of these major decisions on the climate crisis at the global, at the national, at the regional, at the subnational levels. And it's important at this moment that world leaders do listen to this unified message. So thank you.
Thanks very much for that. And I'd like to turn now to Stephen Fisher, the professor of political sociology at the University of Oxford.
Thank you. As the leader of the team at the University of Oxford that advised on the research design and also processed the data, I'd like to talk through some of the methodological aspects of the study briefly, if I may. It ran from September last year to May this year, and the fieldwork was conducted by the international survey research organisation GeoPol. There were 77 different countries covering 87% of the global population, and considering they were especially vulnerable to climate change, the survey included 19 of the least developed countries in the world and also 9 small island developing states. People were invited to participate at random with interviewers calling randomly generated telephone numbers. And this was a crucial part of the study, that no one could participate unless they were randomly chosen and invited. Everyone with access to a phone had an equal chance of being invited. And that was crucial for ensuring that the results in the report are representative and fair of both public opinion in each country and overall for the globe. Now, the interviews were conducted by telephone with local interviewers speaking local languages, and over 87 different languages were used in total. The questionnaire had 4 main parts. The first part, the people's perspective section, was on perceptions of climate change, perceptions of extreme weather events, whether climate change is affecting big life choices such as where to live and work, and worries about climate change. The people's stocktake section asked respondents to assess how their governments and big businesses and other groups were doing at assessing climate change, at addressing climate change. The people's priorities section covered climate policy issues, including protection for nature, protection for people at risk of extreme weather events, the speed people wanted to see the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, and the strength of national climate commitments and demand for more education in schools on climate change. The final section of the questionnaire covered international cooperation to tackle climate change and demand for rich countries to help poorer countries tackle climate change. Special efforts were made to ensure that marginalised groups were represented. For instance, over 10% of the sample globally were people who had never gone to school. So that's over 9,000 respondents never went to school. And of those, 1,200 were women over 60 with no formal education. And it's actually wonderful to be able to bring their voices and a representative sample of such people who are rarely consulted and heard from to a wider audience, especially people with power and responsibility. And my team at the University of Oxford more broadly analysed the data and weighted the data to ensure that it was representative as possible of the age, gender and education profiles of the populations in each country. Now, it was a huge scientific endeavour, the People's Climate Vote Survey 2024. Random sampling and interviewing over 73,000 people in 77 countries with 87 languages was a huge team effort. And I am very grateful to the hundreds of interviewers involved, everyone else from the GeoPol team, and all the randomly selected participants who shared their views with us. As a result, the People's Climate Vote 2024 has timely data of the very highest quality that brings the feelings and the views of people from all around the world. And that information about what the world thinks and wants from climate change will now be available to those with power and responsibility to act on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn the floor over to reporters for questions. Yes, Gabriel?
Hi, my name is Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Thank you, Mr. Fisher and Ms. Flynn, for the briefing. Just two questions. One is, in 2021 People's Climate Vote, you surveyed 1.2 million people, if I'm not mistaken. This time it was around 73,000. What was the thinking about such surveying such less amount of people, given that the crisis is even more than it was 3 years ago? And then the second, 3 or 4 years ago, then the second question is, who do you want to read this report? Who is the key audience for this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Let me start with the second question first, and then I can give some reflections on the first one and hand it to Stephen. In terms of who we want to read this report, we do think that it is this critical moment for world leaders. These decisions that they have to make on energy systems, on food systems, on how we protect people from all of these impacts that we're seeing, these are not small choices that they have to make. And we want them to know where people stand on these issues. And this is a part of why we wanted to bring this sort of unified message to world leaders, because it means that as they are facing these big decisions, that they know exactly where people are within their country, within the region, and within the world. And we're actually providing, as a part of, I mentioned these nationally determined contributions, these pledges under the Paris Agreement they're at a make or break moment, because we are either going to do everything we can to keep ourselves as close to below 1.5 as we can, or we're going to face a very, very uncertain future. And this is where we want these discussions to land, and we've actually created, and it's in the back of the report, sort of country by country profiles, so that every world leader, every CEO, young people, people who care about the climate crisis, they all know where their country specifically stands. So, and on the issue of the 1.2, we actually had a different methodology this year than we did at the previous People's Climate Vote, but I can let Stephen speak to that. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Cassie. Yes, so the 1.2 million people were surveyed in the previous People's Climate Vote report because we were using in-game mobile, random invitations in mobile game apps to reach people. And the consequence of doing that was you reach an awful lot of young people very quickly, and you have to keep on interviewing lots and lots and lots to reach enough older and less educated people. And the other challenge with that is it's very hard to reach enough people in very small countries and countries where broadband and internet connections aren't quite so good for mobile games. So that explains some of the change in methodology to actual people interviewing over the phone at random. And the other thing to bear in mind about the last report is it was conducted during the COVID pandemic, which made interviewing and even telephone interviewing, by bringing people together to do those interviews, quite tricky.
Thanks. Frank?
Hi, Frank Uciardo from TRT World. Thank you for doing this press conference. Based on your research and the results of this survey and ones you've done over the past years, what makes you think world leaders are going to really be impacted by this? And also, you really think it's going to make a difference at COP?
Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. In terms of, will this make a difference at COP? We really are looking at the next 18 months as this critical push on climate action. And given that we know we have the COP in Baku, Azerbaijan, and then after that it would be Belém, Brazil, being able to incorporate very specific policy choices and very specific thinking from people on the climate crisis, we think is a really helpful contribution to the conversation. Because we see a lot of, at the COPs, there's there's an enormous amount of participation. We saw, nearly, of course, 100,000 people at the COP in Dubai. But what we wanted to do was add to that and to say, okay, well, what are people thinking about fossil fuels? What are people thinking about protecting ourselves from climate impacts? And then being able to have, as Stephen was saying, sort of this very credible, robust set of data that can help inform these conversations. We do hope that this will help world leaders as they are facing these big decisions, as they are attending COP, as they are attending the General Assembly, to be able to have this information with them, and that it can ignite conversations either nationally or globally, where people are looking to world leaders to say, hey, we've been a part of this vote. We are very specific about what we're saying, and we do want world leaders to listen.
The largest emitters are the highly industrialized nations. What confidence do you have that you're going to get any action out of them? Past is prologue. It doesn't look good.
Yeah. The G20 has a particular responsibility. I would even expand that in terms of, if you look at the top really 30 emitters, you're looking at 85% of global emissions, and we can't tackle the climate crisis without all of these emitters doing everything that they can. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about this vote is that you saw people within countries, all of these top emitters, a majority of people said, we want climate action, and we want climate action both for our country, but to collaborate on climate action. And I think this is a very, very telling signal that hopefully will contribute to all of these G20 plus emitters really stepping up, and them stepping up over the next 18 months in particular.
Thank you. Deshi?
Yes, Ms. Flynn, Mr. Fisher, I have a couple of questions. First, about the setup of the questions. Obviously, we didn't see any question related the environment climate crisis to economy things. We know that in many countries, the policy on climate crisis, they are actually related to the economy performances. So if we took that into consideration, do you think this vote, the result of this vote, could be a little bit different? And second, I noticed some of the questions, for example, question number 6, how well is your country addressing climate change? It's a question for your opinion, but it doesn't necessarily really reflect the fact. So for this kind of question, what is the purpose of that? And the third one, I believe my colleague have already touched it. With all those, let's say, politics maneuvering in multiple countries, how can you make sure or be confident that those politicians, they will listen to people, even without this vote?
Thank you so much, Deshi. And this point that you're making about sort of the environment versus economy, I think is really important. And one of the things that we really wanted to get at was, how are people experiencing the climate crisis, and what do they want these world leaders to do about it? And embedded within that is this very personal experience of the climate crisis. And we didn't ask people, for example, how much are you willing to pay for something? We think that could be maybe a good follow-up to this, but we really wanted to get a sense at this point where people are in terms of their level of concern about the climate crisis, and that they want world leaders to listen, because the stakes are very high. Also related to that, I think something that is important is that we are seeing incredible solutions come out of countries that bring together climate action with economic development. That in some countries, and we've seen this even with the delivery of solar power, that when you start putting solar panels on top of roofs of hospitals, of schools, that you're able to access populations, especially in rural areas, that now have access to healthcare and access to education in new ways. And the decision wasn't necessarily just about reducing emissions, but actually was about helping people with their development. And this is something that we've seen at UNDP a lot. And this is where we think that this coming together of a climate solution with a development solution is so important. Your question, number 6, about people reflecting on how their country is doing on the climate crisis. We see the climate crisis, it is in the news every single day, and for people to be able to reflect on where are we on this, we thought was really important. How is my country doing? And we saw a lot of people who, in some countries said, we're doing okay. Other countries said we have a long way to go. But what was really interesting about it is that even if they thought a country was doing okay, they still want more. They still say that a country needs to strengthen their climate targets. And I think this goes to this journey that we have over the next year and a half, and these NDCs and the Paris Agreement and the Secretary General's call for everyone, in particular the G20, to be as ambitious as possible. And then on the political maneuvering and the how will politicians listen? Certainly, it's our hope that they do. It's our hope that as they see this very unified voice, it is striking how unified this is, especially when every day we're talking about polarization, we're talking about division. How unified this was, I think, is a very, very powerful signal, and I hope world leaders listen.
Noreen?
Thank you very much. Noreen Hussain with IPS News. I just wanted to clarify, just so that I'm clear, that all the surveys were conducted by phone call. That's correct. In that case, I wanted to know if your teams ever collected any particular information about their location, or whether they were calling from, whether they were the person was living in a rural area or an urban area, anything their age group, for example.
Thank you, Nuri, and I'll turn it to Stephen for that question.
Yes, we did ask about region and location, not so much urban-rural, but just region of the country on an administrative basis, in order to ensure that the samples in each country were balanced with respect to region, and in some of the bigger countries where it was possible with area codes and so on, we could use regional stratification of the sample, so really properly, fully ensure regional balance in the sample. So that was possible in China and Brazil and the US and India and other big countries.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. During during the collection and during analysis, were there any particular points that perhaps that you did not expect to find, certain responses to the questions in your survey, for example?
Is this for me or for Cassie?
Either, whoever. I mean, between both of you,
Stephen, do you wanna go ahead and then I can add?
I'll just initially say what Cassie was saying earlier about the strength of opinion and demand for climate action was so unified and so enormously strong, with 80% of people thereabouts globally, and even higher in some of the poorer countries, wanting their countries to strengthen their commitments on climate change, was really, really quite striking.
Thanks. Iftikhar Ali online, and then you. Thanks.
Hello, Farhan, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you, Farhan. By now, all the questions have been asked. But may I ask, how many developing countries were surveyed in this effort?
Stephen, do you wanna take that?
Yeah, we had
divisions?
19. We had 19 of the least developed countries, the LDC classification, in the survey, and 9 small island developing states, and actually there was an overlap of 3. Some are classified as both.
Thank you.
Yes, you.
Thank you for briefing. My name is Kosuke Hatta from the Japanese daily Mainichi. Based on the report, more than 2/3 people globally said their big decisions were being impacted by climate change, but notably lower in developed countries. So what can you say from this point?
Yeah, thank you for that question. One thing that we did see in the data that I think is really important is that the people who said that they were experiencing the climate crisis more in a day-to-day and a weekly way were those that were incorporating climate change into some of their big decisions, which makes a lot of sense. And when you have when you know you live in a wildfire area, you can't help but think, maybe there's another place where I need to be. Or if you are buying certain things, maybe it's time to buy an electric vehicle if you haven't yet, and because you're experiencing some of these impacts of the climate crisis. And I think this is really remarkable that people are thinking about climate in this day-to-day way. Sometimes climate can be thought of as a big iceberg far away, as a big forest far away. But when it's you and you are seeing this drought or this flood outside your front door, when you are breathing the smoke of a wildfire, all of a sudden your choices change. And I think we saw that really reflected in the data.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? If not, I'll invite any closing comments from you or from Professor Fisher, or?
Just to say thank you for the questions, and thank you for listening to this. We, as Stephen was saying, this has been a years-long process to get to this point. We really wanted to have this to be a credible set of data that can help to inform policymaking and help to inform world leaders. And and as you can see, I'm 8 months pregnant. So
I'm really impressed you came here with all that.
I really appreciate you all taking the time. But when you are pregnant or any big milestone, you start thinking about the future. And I just am really grateful for the coverage of the climate crisis and the need for urgent action, because it's now or never. So thank you.
Thank you. And inshallah, we'll work to create a better future for your baby.
Thank you.
All right. I'd like once more to thank our guests, Cassie Flynn, Stephen Fisher. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.